Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me? Can you all see me as well as the PowerPoint that I have shared? Is this okay for everyone? You can just type a message in the chat box just to let me know if you can hear me, if you can see me, as well as the PPT. Okay, good. All right, thanks everyone for joining. This is the second webinar that I organize on Zoom. And as I said last time, I will try to organize this type of meeting as often as possible. And the objective of these short meetings is to target very specific skills, very specific content within the syllabus, so we can keep it short and simple. And today, I would like to say a few words about public goods. This is usually not a topic that students find very difficult, but it's interesting, and there are many things that there is to say about public goods. Some activities that you can organize with your students, some examples, and you already see one on the first slide of this PPT. And I would like to share with you these activities, these examples, and the way I approach the teaching of public goods with my students. So usually this is a topic that is taught in AS. It's part of the AS syllabus. I'm referring to the Cambridge curriculum. It's actually in the first chapter of the Cambridge curriculum when we discuss the different types of goods, merit goods, demerit goods, and public goods. But this is usually useful to remind this concept of public goods when you teach market failures in A2, just to make sure that students really understand why the market fails in the presence of public goods. Because basically there are let's say four things that your students must be able to do about public goods. First, they need to be able to define what a public good is. Then they must be able to give examples of what public goods could be. Then they must explain why the market fails in the presence of public goods. And finally, they must be able to provide solutions, okay? So anytime there is an essay or a question about public goods, this is pretty much everything that your students need to be able to do. Okay, let's do that. I will come back to this picture a bit later as soon as we have introduced this concept of public good. Let's get started. And again, if you have any question, any remark, feel free to type something, to type your question, remark in the chat box, or you can just unmute your mic and just talk to me. It's good too. All right, so first, it is very important that your students are able to define the concept of public good properly. And the typical mistake, but fortunately not so many students make that mistake, would be to say that the public good is a good provided by the government. This is not the right definition of a public good. It is true that most of the time public goods are provided by the government. Not always. I can give you some examples. There are some public goods provided by private companies, but this is not how you define this concept. And the proper way to define a public good is to define it by its two fundamental characteristics: non-rivalry, non-excludability. So let me define these two fundamental characteristics. What does this feature mean? So rivalry is a simple idea. It's simply a situation where if you consume one unit of a good or service, then it's not going to be, this particular unit will no longer be available to anyone else, okay? So if I eat an apple, this particular apple will no longer be available to anyone else for other people's consumption. And here we understand why we use this word rival. Usually a rival could be in sports, or you could have a rival when you do some boxing, because you have to fight. You have to fight for one particular unit, because if you don't get it, your rival will be able to consume it and you will not be able to. So you fight for the good. That's why you say the good is rival. Non-rival, the good is non-rival in consumption if more than one person can consume the same unit of that particular good, which means that the fact that you consume one particular unit of one good or service does not prevent anyone else from consuming that same unit. The typical example that you can give, and what I use with my examples, is movies that you can watch on Netflix, or I don't know if there are some Chinese equivalent to Netflix, but if you make the decision to watch a movie on Netflix, it does not prevent anyone else from watching the same movie on the same platform at the same time. Okay? So you don't have to fight for who's going to be lucky enough to watch the movie tonight. Everybody can watch the same movie at the same time. Non-rival. Excludability is something very different. It's about, can we exclude those who don't pay? Is this possible? If you don't pay for the good, can you still consume it? If it's the case, then we say that the good is non-excludable. In this case, it's impossible or very, very costly, too costly, to prevent those who have not paid from accessing the good or service. Something that I want to say, and that is very important, here the concept of excludability is not about do we have to pay or not. It's really about, is it possible to prevent people who have not paid from accessing or consuming the good or service? So for example, if you, let's say you are in a small park, you are in the center of a city, and there is a park or a garden, something like that. And it's a free garden, so people don't have to pay to enter the garden in that city. Some students might be tempted to say, okay, then it's free, so it's non-excludable. But remember, this concept of non-excludability is not about do we actually exclude people who don't pay? It's about, is it possible? So even if the park is free, so we do not actually exclude people who have not paid from that park. If it is possible, for example, to build a wall around the garden and to make sure that people must have a ticket to enter the garden, then we would say that the park or the garden is excludable. And non-excludability is the opposite. Once it's provided, once the good is there, once it has been provided by a company or by a government, it is not possible to exclude those who have not paid. Even if you don't pay, you can enjoy the benefits from consuming the good, just like anyone else, just like people who have actually paid for that good or service. Sometimes, in some textbooks, they add a third property, which is non-rejectability, which is the idea that you must consume a public good. It's not possible to choose not to consume it. So the typical example would be a national defense. Everyone in a country consumes, in the sense, enjoys the benefits of being protected by the military. But really the two main characteristics are non-rivalry and non-excludability. If you want to add the non-rejectability characteristic or feature, feel free to do it. But in my opinion, this is less important. Okay, so this is stage one, defining these two characteristics. Stage two is to characterize the different types of goods on the basis of these two characteristics. What happens, for example, if a good is rival and excludable. How do we call this type of good? We call that a private good. A good is, and this is actually 99% of all goods and services in the economy, they are both excludable and rival, private goods. The opposite of a private good is, of course, a public good, a good that is both at the same time non-excludable and non-rival in consumption. Sometimes we add the term pure, a pure public good, because there are some goods that have only one characteristic of a public good and not the other. For example, you have some goods that are rival but non-excludable, or non-rival but excludable. And sometimes we call these goods impure public goods or quasi-public goods. And there are two types of quasi-public goods. So here I'm going a bit beyond the AS syllabus. A good that is non-excludable and rival in consumption, we call that a common resource. And I will give you a few examples in a minute. And a good that is excludable but non-rival in consumption, we call that an artificially scarce good. So as far as AS is concerned, you do not need to teach anything about common resources and about artificially scarce good. I will say a few words about these particular goods in a minute. So really you should put the emphasis on public goods, of course. Okay, so that's the first skill that your students need to acquire to be able to properly define a public good. Second stage is to be able to provide examples, because if you have an essay question about public goods, you need to be able to illustrate your explanations, to illustrate your definitions. So I will mostly focus on public goods, but I will also give you examples of these quasi-public goods. The first type of good, for which we can find examples, are private goods. For private goods, it's not very complicated to find examples. You can literally take everything that comes to your mind, and there is a very high probability that it's going to be rival and excludable. In particular, anything that you have purchased, and if you are the only one able to consume it, for example, so anything related to food, any personal service, anything like that is going to be private goods, so no big issue to define properly, to find examples of private goods. On the other end of the spectrum, you have public goods. I will start with the easiest example and the most common example, but this is also the most boring example in my opinion, which is street light. So yeah, that's a very classical example of a public good. And what is important, and I think you should really tell that to your students, is that it's not enough when your students write an essay, it's not enough to say, for example, street light. And I often see that in my students' essay. They only give the name of the example, but they do not explain why this example is indeed an example of a public good. And if you want to achieve that, you need to explain why street light is non-rival and why street light is non-excludable. So why is street light non-rival? Because the fact that I enjoy the light in the street does not prevent anyone else walking in the street to benefit from this street light. And why is this non-excludable? Because even though I have not paid for this street light, for example, I might be a tourist coming from another country, so of course I have not paid for the street light, not even in taxes, local taxes, then even though I have not paid, it's impossible to prevent me from enjoying the benefit of this street light. There are other examples, public sewer system, which is a very similar type of example, national defense. Let me get back to the first slide. This is usually something that I like. I like to share this example with my students. They often like science fiction. And this example is the one of asteroid defense, where you have this type of meteorites or asteroids that travel through space, and some of them can potentially collide with our planet. And if you look at the the planet here, I think the Gulf of Mexico that we see here, if I remember well my science classes a long time ago, if I remember well, this Gulf was is the consequence of a collision between a big asteroid and our planet. So now that science is, let's say, has much improved recently, NASA and other organizations are trying to develop some defense mechanism. Some strategies to protect our planet against this risk. And you've seen movies, right? You've seen, I think there is one called, is this Armageddon? I forgot the name of this movie. Deep Impact. And the, the story of this movie is pretty much there is a meteorite that is going to hit our planet, and NASA sends some people to fix the problem in space. So I think in one movie they are trying to nuke, to put a bomb inside the asteroid, and there are other strategies that consist in trying to influence the trajectory of this meteorite so it avoids our planet. Well, you see the picture. You can do some additional research about this defense mechanism if you are interested in it. But this is a good example of a public good. It is non-excludable. Once our planet is equipped with such a defense mechanism, every form of life, not only humans, but even animals, plants, everything that is alive on our planet will enjoy the benefit of being protected by this defense mechanism, even though they have not paid for it. A plant is not going to pay for this defense mechanism. And it's non-rival in the sense that the fact that I benefit from this protection does not prevent my dog from enjoying this protection as well. So I think it's a more sexy or appealing example of public good, a bit more entertaining than street light, in my opinion. Okay, because in a classroom, I often tell my students, because I teach in a classroom like most of you, I assume, and I often ask them, can you find any example of a public good in this classroom? So it's always a bit difficult, but I think in a classroom, what you could use as an example of a public good is the clock. If you have a clock in your classroom, it's non-excludable in the sense that, well, we could argue, of course, but you could say that the clock is non-excludable because even those who have not paid for the clock, they can look at it and know what time it is. And it's non-rival because the fact that I look at the time on the clock does not prevent any of my classmates or students to look at what time it is. Or you could give another example with clock. You can take the example of Big Ben in London. When you look at what time it is on Big Ben, it does not prevent anyone else from enjoying the same benefit at the same time. And even though you have not paid for this huge clock, you can still enjoy the benefit. Radio broadcasts, again, anytime a radio program is on the air, even if you have not paid for it, you can enjoy it. It's non-rival because there is no limit on the number of people who can enjoy the radio broadcast. Okay, many examples, and I insist on that students, they must be able to explain why these examples illustrate public goods, why they are non-rival and non-excludable. And then you have these two intermediary goods, this quasi-public good, artificially scarce good, and common resources. I'm not going to say too much for now. I will come back a bit later. For now, I really want to focus on the issue of public goods. And if we have some time left, I will talk a little bit about these quasi-public goods. Okay, so that's stage two. We have a definition of public goods, and we are able to illustrate, to give examples of public goods. What we must be able to do now is to explain why the market fails in the presence of a public good. And actually, there are two reasons for which the market fails. There is one reason that is connected to the non-excludability characteristic, and there is another reason that is connected to the non-rivalry characteristic. So let's start with the first problem, which is a consequence of the fact that public goods are non-excludable. And you know that this issue of non-excludability is called the free riders problem. Okay, let's introduce this free riders problem. This is a key concept. This is a keyword that must be used in your student's essay. Okay, so let me guide you step by step. So private goods are the only good that will be produced and consumed in efficient quantities in a competitive market. Okay, I will explain what happens with public goods. Goods that are non-excludable suffer from the free riders problem. How do we define it? It's important that your students are able to give a definition. Free riding occurs, I forgot an S, when individuals are not excluded if they do not pay. Okay, that's the definition of non-excludable. So that's the consequence. They have no incentive to pay for their own consumption. And instead, they will take a free ride on anyone who does pay. So you have someone who pays to purchase the good, or so the good is being produced, the good is effectively provided, it's there, and once it's there, everybody can have it for free. So in this case, if you are rational, you should not contribute, you should not pay, you should just wait until someone provides the good, someone pays for the good, for example, and once it's there, you can just enjoy it for free. But you see where the problem is going to be. If everybody adopts this type of behavior, which is a rational behavior, which is a selfish behavior, self-interested behavior, if everybody expects other consumers to make the effort to pay or to contribute, at the end of the day, no one is going to be willing to pay. And businesses, they know that. They are not stupid, they can anticipate, they know that the goods that they might produce would be non-excludable, and they can anticipate that the demand for a non-excludable good would be zero. Nobody is willing to pay for a non-excludable good. So if the demand is zero, do they have an incentive to produce it? Do they have an incentive to allocate resources to the production of that non-excludable good? Absolutely not. And therefore, it's not going to be provided. That's what I explained. Therefore, rational consumers will not be willing to pay for non-excludable goods, zero demand, effective demand. And so no producer is willing to supply non-excludable goods. And that's why this is how you should explain why the market fails in the presence of a public good in general and non-excludable goods in particular. So what type of market failure do we have? We have an under-provision, inefficiently low production. We should produce more to improve total surplus. You can ask your students, I think this is an interesting question, you can ask them, as a student, have you ever adopted the free riding behavior? So usually they don't really see what I mean by this question. And then I often ask them about when you do some group work, when you work in group with your classmates, have you ever adopted the free riding behavior? And then they start to understand my point. When your students work as a group, and if at the end of the day there is one single grade or mark for everyone, all group members have the same grade, then again you could say that the grade is non-excludable. It's not really good in itself, but some students will have an incentive to sit back and relax and wait until their group mates make the effort, complete the task, and then even the student who has sit back and relax and has not contributed to the task will also get a good grade. This is a behavior of free riding, and I'm sure many of you know students who are very good at free riding. So yeah, it's really something that you can use to help them to understand this concept of free riding. So this problem can actually be illustrated with an example. You see this star here, this one step further star means that it's beyond the syllabus for one simple reason. It's because this example uses game theory, which is part of the A2 syllabus. If you want to use it, I don't think it's very complicated. So I will introduce it, and then you can just choose if you want to use it with your students or not. You can use it when you introduce public goods for the first time in AS. You can use it when you review public goods in A2, or you could even use it when you teach game theory at the end of the A2 microeconomics syllabus. This is an example that I use with my students, and I call it the air purifier. So let me tell you the story. So we have two colleagues. We have Jacob and Sarah, and they are colleagues, and they have the same office. They work in the same office, and they are concerned about the air quality inside their office. A friend of theirs suggests that they purchase an air purifier. You see where this is going. You could say that an air purifier is a good example of a public good. Once it's there, it's non-excludable. Even if you have not paid for it, you enjoy the benefit of breathing clean air in your office. And it's non-rival, because the fact that I breathe clean air does not prevent my colleagues from breathing clean air. So we could argue that an air purifier is a public good. So the price of that air purifier is 2,000 RMB. I think it's a bit expensive, but you know, some of them are quite big and quite expensive. And they do purchase it, they will both benefit from breathing a cleaner air. Okay? They will put this air purifier in the middle of their office, and they will both benefit from clean air. And we can give a monetary value to that benefit. Okay? For example, they will not have to go to the hospital because they have lung problems. So let's just give a monetary value to this, to the benefit of breathing clean air. And let's say that each of them would get a benefit of 1,500 RMB, each of them. So what do they have to do? They have to decide whether or not they are going to contribute. Will they pay for the air purifier, yes or no? And this is going to be a simultaneous decision. Well, something that is important in game theory, you know, that there are sequential games and simultaneous games, but it doesn't really matter for now. What they have to do to decide, do I pay, yes or no? If they both decide to pay, well, they are going to share the price, 50-50. So each of them pays 1,000 RMB. If only one of them decides to contribute, to pay, then this person, he or she, Jacob or Sarah, has to pay the full price, because he or she is the only one who chooses to pay for this air purifier. And finally, if none of them decides to contribute, then they will not buy the air purifier, end of story, and they will not enjoy the benefit, of course. So you see that I have described a game, 2 players, Jacob and Sarah, 2 strategies for each. Do I pay, yes or no? And then I have given information about the cost and benefits of each combination of strategy. The question that you can ask your students: will Jacob and Sarah's office will it be equipped with an air purifier? You can represent this game with this payoff matrix. Oh yeah, it's perhaps a bit advanced for AS, but you can use it in A2 if you want, or you can take some time to explain it, so then it will be easier for them to understand game theory later. So each row represents one of Jacob's strategy, contributes, does not contribute. Each column represents one of Sarah's strategy, contributes, does not contribute. And then you have each cell, which is each cell represents a combination of strategies. And we are going to put 2 figures. The first one in the light gray color will be Jacob's net benefit, and the darker gray area will be Sarah's net benefit. So if they both contribute, let's start with let's start with Jacob. If Jacob contributes and Sarah actually, let's put it this way: if they both contribute, they each pay 1,000 RMB, half the price of the air purifier, and each of them enjoys a benefit of 1,500 RMB. So the net benefit is 500 RMB. Okay, that's the first sale. If none of them contribute, this is the last sale, then, well, no cost, no benefit, so 0 RMB. If Jacob, let's look at this sale here. If Jacob does not contribute, so he doesn't pay, but Sarah contributes, so she has to pay 2,000 RMB. Then Jacob enjoys the benefit of breathing clean air, 1,500 RMB, does not pay anything, so that's his net benefit. Sarah enjoys the benefit of breathing clean air, 1,500 RMB, but she has to pay 2,000 RMB for the air purifier. So her net benefit is negative, minus 500 RMB. And here, it's the opposite, right? When Jacob contributes and Sarah does not contribute, it's the opposite. And then you can find the equilibrium of the game. So the easiest way is to use the dominant strategy argument or dominant strategy equilibrium. Your students can see very well that for each of them, the strategy does not contribute is always better. You don't have to enter into details. You can just show them the figures and say, hey, look for Jacob. If Sarah contributes, it's better for Jacob not to contribute because 1,500 is better than 500. And if Sarah chooses not to contribute, still it's better for Jacob not to contribute because 0 is better than minus 500. So you can just tell them, hey, so for Jacob, it's always best not to contribute. You can say it's a dominant strategy. And then you say, well, but this game is the same for Sarah and Jacob. It's a symmetric game. So if Jacob is always better off not contributing, the same is true with Sarah. And you can find the equilibrium of the game. You can just show them, then you see that situation, none of them is going to pay for the air purifier. Each of them is free riding. Each of them is waiting for the other or expecting that the other will contribute. And at the end of the day, none of them will contribute. And we will be in a situation that is going to be inefficient from a collective perspective. From a collective perspective, we see that the ideal situation would be for both of them to contribute. But in that situation, because none of them contributes, we see that they will not enjoy the benefit of breathing cleaner air in their office. So to me, it's a good example to illustrate the issue of free riding. Again, it's beyond the scope of the AS syllabus, but if you want to go, if you have good students and if you want to illustrate this, this free riders problem, you can use this example. Okay? All right. What about the problem of non-rivalry? So non-rivalry creates another problem. I'll just finish this point, and then if you have any question, I will give you some time to ask any question that you may have. Basically, the problem that we have with artificially scarce good is that the marginal cost of production is 0. This is really what you must remember. If a good is non-rival, the marginal cost is 0. You can think of Netflix. It doesn't cost Netflix anything to allow one additional viewer for watching a movie. There is no additional cost, or it's very, very, very small. So it doesn't cost anything to produce one more unit of a non-rival good. Okay. So this is a problem because if you remember about economic efficiency, if you want to achieve economic efficiency, then you need to have the marginal cost of production equal to the marginal benefit of consumption. But if the marginal cost of production is 0, as is the case with non-rival goods, then it means that if you want to achieve efficiency, then the marginal benefit must be equal to 0, okay? Since it must be equal to the marginal cost. So you must produce the quantity and sell the quantity at which the marginal benefit is 0. But if you want to do that, if you want people to purchase your product until the marginal benefit is 0, then the price at which you sell it must also be 0. So this all means, and this is what you can keep in mind, that if you have a non-rival good, the optimal price is 0. The price at which you will maximize total surplus, the price at which you will not have any deadweight loss is 0. But of course, businesses can't do that. A business cannot produce a product and then give it away for free. So in practice, businesses, they charge a price greater than zero, even for a non-rival good, so they can cover their cost of production. And this is why this leads to an inefficiency. The price is too high compared to its efficient level, zero. And if the price is too high, the quantity demanded is too low. So you see, this is another reason for which public goods are not sufficiently provided in a market or free market economy. Okay, let me just summarize this idea. Since allocative efficiency is achieved, again, this is beyond the scope of the AS syllabus, but you can discuss this point in A2 when you talk about market failures. Since allocative efficiency is achieved when MC is equal to MB, individuals should consume the good up to the point where the marginal benefit is zero, so the efficient price is zero, but firms can't do that, so they will charge a price above zero in order to artificially, and that's why we call that artificially scarce good, artificially exclude some of the potential consumer, and therefore consumption is inefficiently low. There is a diagram that I use with a bridge. You have the marginal benefit of consumption. This is your demand curve. This is the number of cars, which is the quantity of output on that bridge. And because this good is non-rival, let's just assume that this bridge is non-rival. It does not cost anything to allow one more car to cross the bridge. So the marginal cost is so low that we can consider it's zero. So where is the allocatively efficient output when marginal benefit is equal to marginal cost? This is the optimal quantity, and this is the optimal price, zero. So the big triangle would be the total surplus in this case. But businesses can't do that. They can't it's private companies, right? Private companies, they cannot allow cars to cross the bridge for free. Otherwise, because they had cost of production, it was very costly for them to build the bridge. So they must charge a price in order to recoup their investment. What they do is that they will charge a price above zero. It doesn't matter where it's going to be, but it's going to be above zero, P1, for example. And you see that at that price, the number of cars that are going to cross the bridge are going to be much lower than the efficient quantity. And therefore, there is a deadweight law. It's represented by this area. Again, this is a bit beyond the syllabus, but I think it's interesting to understand beyond the free riders problem why non-rivalry creates another issue. So there are two problems with public goods. Okay, so to conclude, what do? We know how to define public goods. We know how to illustrate, to give examples of public goods. We know how to explain why the market fails when there is a public good. What can we do to fix this market failure? So let's summarize the problem we have. Because they are non-excludable, they suffer from the free riders problem. Because they are non-rival, it would be inefficient to charge people for consuming them. So the free market is not going to provide public goods in sufficient quantity. So usually the best response is state provision, when the government is going to take over the production of public goods, to use tax revenue to produce public goods, or to subsidize businesses that are going to be responsible for the production of public goods. That's one possibility, and that's usually the possibility that is used most of the time, state provision. There are other options that are less important, but you can mention these solutions to your students. There might be examples of voluntary contributions. For example, private donations to support public radios or scientific research, or even, sometimes there are YouTube channels. If you watch content creator, content provider, people who have a YouTube channel, and if you like their channel very much, you can give them some money, you can donate some money. Even though what they produce is non-excludable and it's non-rival, so people who produce videos on YouTube, you could argue that they produce public goods, but still there are some people who help them, who want to help them because they like the content. And in this case, without the intervention of government, there are some public goods being produced by private individuals through voluntary contributions. Another example is you can have some private businesses that produce public goods because they can make money in an indirect way. The best example is broadcast television, or even radio. When you create a radio program, you create a public good. Anybody can listen to your radio program for free, non-rival, non-excludable. You cannot charge a price for it, so you will not receive money from the people who listen to your radio broadcast. But if you have a large audience, then you can sell advertising time to private businesses that want to advertise on your radio broadcast. So you see that in this way, you produce a public good, but you can use the audience that you have to make money in an indirect way by selling ads. And this is exactly what YouTube is making. This is exactly what Facebook is making, social networks. They do not make members pay, but through advertising, they make a lot of money. Yeah. Sometimes we say that for these services, we say that we, the members, are the product, because YouTube, Facebook, they sell ourselves or our willingnesses to buy products to companies who want to sell advertisements. Okay. In small communities, you can also mention that a high level of social encouragement or pressure can be brought to bear on people to contribute money or time to provide the efficient level of public good. In small villages, if you do not contribute for something that would be in the public interest, maybe everybody will know that, hey, you have not paid for that, you have not given money, you have not given your time to help the community, you are a bad person. And if you live in this type of small community, and if you experience this social pressure, it might be in your best interest to contribute to the provision of public good so you can keep good relationships with your community. Okay, and when these solutions fail, it's up to the government to provide public goods. So it's one cause of market failure and one reason for government intervention. And I'm done. All right, I think I said pretty much everything that I wanted to say about public goods. It's quite comprehensive. Do you have any questions or remarks? Anything you'd like to say? Is everything clear? Anything you'd like to add, perhaps? You're welcome. No questions? If you don't have any questions, perhaps you have other suggestions on what could be the topic of our next webinar? Anything you would like me to cover, to discuss? Think about it. I'll give you 2 minutes to think about it. And if you don't have any suggestion, we'll stop here for today. If some of you teach AP, in AP, it's more important to know about this quasi-public goods, to know about these common resources and artificially scarce goods. But for Cambridge, it's not very important. Yeah, AP, for AP, it is quite important to explain the issue of common resources, the tragedy of the commons, the problem of externality that arises from the existence of this non-excludability problem. There are some resources on my website for AP where I explain in detail the problem of common resources. Monopoly, Monopoly, sure, why not? The balance of payments, the balance of payments is a tough one. There is a video on my YouTube channel. If you log into my website, you see there is the address of the website at the bottom. And at the bottom of my website, there is a YouTube symbol, and you can access my YouTube channel. And there is a video that I recorded last year that is called "Why Does the Balance of Payments Always Balances?" And I give examples. So it will take me a bit more time to prepare something different about the balance of payments, because it's a tough topic to teach. But Carly, if you want to know, you can have a look at this video. Could be a good start to understand the principle of double entry bookkeeping. This really helps to understand the balance of payments. But yeah, we will do something about the BOP sometimes for sure. The market structure, okay, we can do that. So if we do market structures, we could start with a perfect competition. Then we'll do monopoly, oligopoly, and monopolistic competition. Why not? We can have these 4 webinars, one for each type of market structure. But it really is a big topic, so I don't think that we can have one single webinar for perfect competition, one single for monopoly, because this is a big topic. We might need at least two webinars for each. Okay, that makes sense to me. I like this part of the syllabus. I like teaching market structures, and I have many resources for that. And again, if you have questions, feel free to send me a message. You have all my contact information right there. All right, no more questions, no more suggestions. Okay, then let's stop here for tonight. Again, thanks for joining, and I will probably schedule another webinar tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, about market structures. Good night, everyone. See you soon.